Hi, my name is attorney David Gibbs, and I want to thank you for taking these next few minutes with me to discuss one of the most important lawsuits that have impacted our country in the last few years. The name Terri Schiavo brings up many memories as people remember back just a few short years ago as the world watched what the United States of America would do with this disabled woman. You'll remember that the parents wanted to keep her alive, and the husband who would ultimately prevail wanted her to die. It went to the White House, it went to the Congress, the governor's mansion, the legislative halls. In early 2005, it was the #1 news story around the world. It pulled people in from all across the political spectrum. If you think about this, I've never seen it before, but in your lifetime, have you ever seen an issue where Rush Limbaugh and Jesse Jackson agreed on something? But interestingly, both those men thought Terri Schiavo should live. Yet with all this media coverage, all this attention, as we now look back on this case, what I discover is that people are fundamentally confused. They don't understand what really happened. Many people say to me, David, this is basically a sad end-of-life case. This young girl was dead or dying, and she was on life support, and the parents wouldn't let go. But you know, when you dig deeper and find out the facts, that Terri Schiavo was as alive as any person watching me today. She breathed on her own. Her heart, her lungs completely functioned on their own. There was no disease in her body that was ending her life. She was alive and she wasn't dying. You say, well, Mr. Gibbs, what is the fuss about? What was the lawsuit all about? Terri Schiavo, because of her disability, could not feed herself. She couldn't do what most of you could do. She couldn't reach out and take food and water and put it into her own mouth, and that then required that people help her eat. So the whole case determined whether we would take away food and water from an innocent woman who couldn't feed herself. And that was the issue that was put before the courts. You say, well, Mr. Gibbs, I kind of heard that she was, a vegetable, or that she just didn't even have any responsiveness, or that she was just completely toasted. And I heard that too, and was completely shocked the first time I went to see Terri Schiavo. I'm with her mom and dad, Bob and Mary Schindler, and as we walk into the room, I'm expecting a medically severe situation. I'm expecting monitors and medical personnel, and I'm completely shocked to find Terri Schiavo sitting in the room in a blue lazy boy chair like you'd have in your living room, listening to the radio, playing with some stuffed animals, sitting there all by herself. She wasn't even eating at this point, so nothing's hooked up to her. As we walk into the room, I'm then surprised again because I'm wondering in my mind, will she respond? Will she interact with us? And I'm completely startled as Terri squeals and jumps forward in her seat and gets all excited at the presence of her mother. Mary Schindler, Terri's mom, and I believe there's a bond between a mother and a daughter that just never goes away. Mary bent over, and as she would kiss her daughter and say, Terri, honey, I'm here to invite you and show you some new friends, and I love you, honey. And as she would kiss her daughter, Terri Schiavo would turn her head and kiss her mother back. Now, not probably as good as most of you could control your mouth, but to me it always looked like she was nibbling or gently chewing on her mother's cheek. Mary then said, honey, I want to show Mr. Gibbs what we've been working on. And she said, honey, I want you to say I. And I understood that in these brain-injured conditions that the doctors will tell us a lot more gets in, but communication, expression can be exceptionally difficult. And all of a sudden, Terri Schiavo would struggle and respond to her mother, I, real loud, right back at her. Mary said, oh, honey, you're doing good. Now I want you to say love. And Terri Schiavo would get the L real strong. Love, right back at her mom. Now you have to understand, Mary Schindler's a stay-at-home mom. She doesn't have any medical background or physical therapy training. She's just doing what she thinks would help her daughter. And Mary would sit there and do this dozens of times, say I and say love, and then she'd say you. And I never saw Terri say the yous, but she would try so hard to communicate with her mom. I did some things that would be rude if I did them to you. I was talking and I went behind Terri Schiavo, so I'm standing directly behind her. She's looking forward in the other direction, and I would talk over the top of her head. Terri Schiavo would twist and turn to see what I was doing and what I was talking about behind her. Her response to her dad was completely different. Her dad was from the Philadelphia area, had a mustache, and sometimes didn't shave his chin as close, and he'd come in and be a little more aggressive with her. He'd say, now you get all excited for your mom and you squeal when she comes into the room, and he would say, now I want you to give your daddy a kiss. And boy, as he would turn at her, she would purse up her face, make this lemon face like to avoid the kiss of her dad, turn her head and giggle. Now, was Terri Schiavo disabled? Absolutely. I hope and pray that anybody watching this video, I hope that you have good health. I hope that your family, your loved ones, the people you care about, I hope that they have good health and never have to face a disability like Terri underwent. But here's a young lady who is alive. She's not dying. All she needs is food and water to stay alive. And she's responding. She's recognizing people. She's giving basic communication. She's basically paying attention to what's going on in the room around her. And so here you have Terri Schiavo. And we decided with a court that she could have her food and water taken away and slowly die a death by dehydration. You say, well, Mr. Gibbs, now I thought this case maybe dealt with her wishes. I mean, what did she want? And they talk about in the law the right of self-determination, that you should be able to decide what happens to you medically. And that is the law. Now, I caution people to make sure any decisions you make are entered into prayerfully and thoughtfully, and to think about your faith and what you believe before you decide anything of this nature. But the law does allow you to self-determine or to make these decisions. Interesting, in the Terri Schiavo case, Terri never did that. She never had a living will. She never had any medical documents. She was only 26 when she collapsed. And the husband kind of flip-flopped in how he handled all of this. To give you a very quick timeline, Terri Schiavo's 26 years old. And she collapses on the floor of her home and would suffer a temporary deprivation of blood and oxygen to her brain, and that would create the disability that would be with her the rest of her life. And Terri, in the early days, 1990, her husband gave directives. He said, do everything you can to keep my wife alive. And Terri began to recover and do quite well. I'm told that she was actually walking a little bit with the help of bars and speaking more clearly in the early 90s. And then they began to run out of money. And the husband got the idea that we'll sue some doctors. And he proceeded to sue some doctors for malpractice, and actually stood before a jury in 1993 and said, I want to take care of my wife for the rest of her life. He asked for $20 million. The jury didn't give him $20 million, but he was given a multi-million-dollar verdict. And right there in the year 1993, 1994, everything began to change. The money came in, and number two, the husband got a new girlfriend. Now you can see the natural tension that would exist as you have a disabled wife and now you have a new girlfriend, and the money came in. And the husband went back on everything that he had promised the parents, that he would love and take care of his wife, their daughter, for the rest of his life. And he now decided that really Terri wouldn't want to live like this. And he took the money dedicated for Terri's care and used that to hire lawyers to advocate that she should die. I'm a firm believer that if at all possible, these matters should be worked out between families, that these type of things shouldn't be in court or be litigated about, that families should be able to agree and make these decisions. And this is exactly where the rift settled in, where the husband, in a sense, betrayed what the parents thought he was going to do. This case worked its way through the courts, and in the year 2000, a judge basically looked at it and said, well, this is what the husband wants. Let's go ahead and allow it. Now, you say, Mr. Gibbs, how could a judge do that? Tragically, in this case, this particular judge never went to see Terri Schiavo. Never one time looked at her, never had her in a wheelchair brought to the courtroom, never appointed an independent lawyer for her. So here, Terri Schiavo's case, her life and her death are done before a judge almost in a vacuum. She wasn't even present. That was upheld on appeal, and in the year 2003, Terri was set to die. That's when I met Bob and Mary Schindler. I remember when they walked into my office for the first time, and it was late at night, and as they began to explain what was happening, I realized with our team of attorneys that it was fairly bleak. Their case had been lost, had been upheld on appeal, and things didn't look good for them. And I remember talking with Bob Schindler, and what he said to me, it still rings in my ears today. He said, David, would you do whatever you can to help save my girl? And then he said, number two, if they end up killing her, will you make sure everybody knows what happened? That night I said, Bob, let's not focus on number two, let's focus on number one. And we did watch some incredible things happen as many people rallied and attempted to save the life of Terri Schiavo. The governor and the Florida legislature would pass what became known as Terri's Law, and that law would keep Terri Schiavo alive for the last few years of her life. As this law was passed and we thought that indeed Terri Schiavo's life was spared, the Florida Supreme Court came back and said, no, the governor cannot do this, the legislature cannot do it, and Terri's life was in jeopardy once again. That created the biggest media frenzy. Late 2004, early 2005, it was the number one news story around the world as people were trying to figure out what would happen as this young lady's life hung in the balance. Then the United States Congress got involved. It was a Palm Sunday in March of 2005, and many may remember as the congressmen came in from across the country. And I realize today that politically, this has become a hot potato subject, that many of the Democrats will use this case as a weapon, and a lot of the Republicans have backed away with sort of a, aw shucks, we messed up, we probably shouldn't have done that. And let me just say this, having talked to hundreds of the congressmen, the senators, their staffers, their lawyers, White House personnel in Washington, D.C. that weekend, my phone was the point of contact. It would ring literally probably every 2 to 3 minutes with someone. And as I would talk with these people and discuss the case, they were very candid as to what the concerns were in Washington, D.C. And I think they're legitimate concerns today. Number one, they were concerned that Terri Schiavo was going to die this horrible death. Now let me explain that. Senator Frist, who's now resigned from Tennessee, was a cardiologist. David Weldon, a medical doctor from Florida. These men and their staff said, do you understand the horror of dehydration? Now, I'll be real candid. I didn't. I knew that being thirsty didn't seem good. It didn't seem like a right way to die. But they explained how when you die by dehydration, the body desperately seeks water. Generally 7 to 10 days when it's dried the skin and all the internal organs, and they realize no more water is coming. That your heart, being a weaker organ, will desperately begin to search out for water. And what happens is you don't have a heart attack. You have a heart explosion as it literally disintegrates from the lack of hydration. They said it's a very painful way to die. That, by the way, is why we don't do it to animals. That, by the way, is why our Constitution doesn't allow it to happen to convicted killers. So the horror of the death troubled them greatly. The second thing that troubled them was the unfairness. Now, I'll keep this real simple. If you're ever sentenced to die by your state, now please understand, ahead of Terri Schiavo, that was always in a murder case, a capital case. But if you're ever sentenced to die, you're entitled to a federal court review to make sure you were treated fairly. Terri Schiavo didn't get that. Why? She didn't murder anybody. She was an innocent woman, and she had less protection than convicted killers. What the congressman said, and I agree with them, is that's unfair. Why would we protect them more than this disabled woman? And so they proceeded to pass a law that we truly thought was a second miracle to save Terri's life. We were in federal court, and this case will set a record in American history. The American Bar Association told me it's the only case in American history that went to the United States Supreme Court and back twice in 10 days. It moved very quickly. The courts tragically declined to do what the president and the Congress had intended. And instead, they said, we stand by that one judge who never saw Terri Schiavo. His decision is final. What the president and the Congress did will be rendered a nullity. And on March the 31st, right around midnight or 1 in the morning, the final Supreme Court appeal was denied. March the 31st, around 9:05 in the morning, Terri Schiavo, just a few short hours after her final appeal was denied, would step into eternity. You may say, watching this, well, Mr. Gibbs, that's a sad case, and feel sorry for the family, what they experienced in terms of a loss. But I think I heard somewhere that, dying like that isn't all that bad, that it's kind of a quiet, almost a peaceful drifting off. Could I beg to differ just a little, my friend? I was in the room with Mary Schindler the last time she would see her daughter alive. We didn't know it was the last time, but at this point you have to imagine kind of a frenzied scene outside. There's hundreds of news media, all the major networks there with trucks and towers, hundreds of protesters, police and sharpshooters all around. The road is closed, and so it's fairly chaotic. And Mary just said, David, would you walk over with me? And I knew what that meant. Would you just help me get through the crowd? And I was on the very short list of who could actually go in and see Terri. We made our way through the crowd, multiple searches, and please understand, at this hospice, all the protocols were off. Mary Schindler was prohibited from doing anything to comfort her daughter. What you might consider just an ordinary act of wiping her brow or even putting ice chips on her tongue, it was prohibited. Mary Schindler could do nothing to help her daughter. There would be an armed police officer behind her at all times to make sure that indeed she didn't in any respect do what would be in the heart of every mother to do, to reach out and to provide comfort and love to a daughter. As we made our way down the hallway into the room where we had visited Terri before, the first thing that just absolutely startled me was the noise. It almost sounded like a machine or something had broken, and as we made our way in, it dawned on me that that was Terri's breathing. It had gone into what they call the death pant. When you breathe in and you breathe out, and it's generally a pretty quiet experience. You don't generally hear someone breathing, but when you start to die, it becomes gaspy and raspy, and it was extremely loud as Terri Schiavo was now very close to death. As we walked up, and as I would walk past the head of her bed down to the foot and look up at her, it was a very tragic sight. All the health, all the life was now out of her face. Many of you will remember some of the images. There were one or two that were shown over and over again. Terri following a balloon, or Terri smiling at her mother. And you could tell from those images that Terri Schiavo, for her disability, was an attractive individual. Her complexion, her hair, it was well kept. All the health, all the life is now completely out of her face. The only way to really describe it would be to look at it as skeletal, like you took a skeleton and stretched skin or even stretched saran wrap or something real thin, all the crevices in the cheekbone and in the jawline are now protruding. All the pulp, all the flesh, all the fat is out of her face. Underneath her eyes are big dark circles. It looked for all the world like you punched her. Her skin looked to me almost sunburned. Again, it made sense with all the drying that was going on. As the moisture was out, it was red, it was flaky. Her lips were parched. I had seen parched lips before. I had never seen a completely parched mouth, where a tongue and a roof of the mouth were completely flaking and peeling from lack of moisture. As Mary Schindler would lean over Terri, as I'd watched her do many times before, this dear mother was going through what I believe no mother should ever have to go through. As she began to cry, and as she began to pray, and as she began to talk to Terri, it would kind of mix between the three. Oh God, please don't let my daughter feel this. And then just sob and, Terri, honey, it's your mom. I love you, sweetie. Don't fight it, honey. It's okay. You'll be with God soon. Please, God, please don't let Terri suffer. As I stood at the foot of that bed, watching this mother go through this tragic moment, looking behind her, there's the police officer to make sure that she doesn't do what's in the heart of any mother to do to help her own daughter. I can now see some of Mary's tears running down what I'll call the dry channels of Terri's cheeks. I then looked over on the other side of the bed, and it always struck me as ironic. On one hand, they'd call her a vegetable, but they knew she felt pain. And there was the morphine that was there to alleviate the horrific death that would occur when her heart would ultimately give out from the dehydration. I'll tell you, my friend, as I stood at the foot of that bed, it shook my convictions to the core. I'd grown up in a country that I love. I had a good family, a mom and a dad that told me to love America, to respect the military, to obey the police. And I'm proud to be an American. But as I stood at the foot of that bed, I thought, this isn't what our founding fathers intended. This isn't why our Constitution was written. This isn't why soldiers have gone overseas and given their lives so that we could stand here and kill an innocent, disabled woman. I don't know how long we were in the room. We were on a 24-hour clock at this point, and time begins to get a little surreal. Probably 20, 30 minutes. Mary Schindler would turn and walk out into the hallway and never go back. She said, I just can't do it. It's killing me to see my daughter like that. As I would join her in the hallway, Mary would take my arm for just a minute to stabilize. We were timed to get out. We couldn't dally about. But as she was blotting the tears from her eyes and waiting for the mob that would greet us both outside, I'll never forget what Mary said to me. She said, David, I'm no lawyer and I'm no doctor. But she said, what I don't understand, why do they have to kill my little girl? I said, Mary, you know I'm a lawyer and I'm no doctor. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. And my friend, whether you're watching this and your perspective is one of sympathy for the parents, or maybe your perspective in watching this is you feel more inclined towards the position of the husband. That is a haunting question that was through this whole case. When you have a mom, when you have a dad who are willing to take care of the daughter, why did we have to insist that she die? You know, that was what the international media focused on. This case was covered worldwide. I did interviews in every continent around the world. And they asked questions like, Mr. Gibbs, by what moral authority does America let this girl die? And I think you can agree with me, there really is no moral authority to do what we did to Terri Schiavo. Let me share with you just a couple of the spiritual lessons that I personally learned going through this case, and I challenge you as you watch this video to ask yourself these questions. I believe, number one, that God is the giver of all life. And I believe that after this case, we have to decide, will we defend life as a gift from God? Please understand, there's a different side. There's people who say life is an accident, it has no purpose, it was all a big spontaneous evolutionary moment, and there is no creator, there is no God, there is no giver of life, and I just respectfully disagree. I believe, according to the Word of God, that God gives life, and God allows good things, and God allows bad things into every life. But I believe that God and God alone should end life. And I challenge you to be a person who respects each and every life as something that is sanctified or special, that there's a sanctity to each life from God Himself. Number two, I'd encourage you as you think about this case to have a heart for what I call less than perfect people. I had someone come up to me after the case and say, David, you did a good job. I saw stuff on TV and the internet, and I really appreciate what you did, but I don't understand, why would someone waste their time on a person like Terri Schiavo? I mean, why would you put all that effort? She's not going to vote. She's not going to get a job. She's not going to pay a legal bill. Why would you do it? And my friend, there's a simple and a short answer. And you can find it in Matthew 25 and verse 40. The answer is people like Terri Schiavo matter to God Himself. In Matthew 25 verse 40, and I'm paraphrasing here gently, but what God says is, what you've done unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. Wow. What we did to Terri Schiavo, we did to God Himself. It broke my heart to think that ahead of the Terri Schiavo case, maybe I was too busy to even see the least of these. I'd lived my life and I needed to see people, and we're in a culture where it's win-win. You do for me, I'll do for you. And if you're not careful, my friend, all of life can become a negotiated selfishness. You know who the least of these are? They're the people who can't do anything back for you. Oh, that could be a senior citizen. That could be a disabled brother or sister. That could be someone else's child. That could be someone living on the foreign field. And you know what? Those people can't do anything for you. But you know what God says? He says, what you do unto them, you did unto me. I hope and pray we defend life. I hope and pray we develop the heart of God for the least of these. And then I challenge you, number three, to make sure that you make all your decisions in light of eternity. A lot of people got out of the Terri Schiavo case a lesson I don't agree with. Go get a living will, and then you won't have this problem. But most living wills, my friend, are very pro-death. They read kind of like, kill me quickly, and I won't sue. And I don't believe those are the best ways to approach these issues. Let me share with you a short testimony. A lady came to me and said, Mr. Gibbs, my dad was an unsaved man and very pro-death in his orientation. He had a living will, a do not resuscitate. He always told us, don't keep me alive. I got the word one day, ma'am, your dad's rushed to the hospital, you're next of kin. What do we do? And she said, Mr. Gibbs, I disobeyed everything my dad told me. I said, keep him alive. We've got to come share our faith with him one final time. We rushed to the hospital, and it was very difficult communication, but we think that with the blinks and the squeezes that maybe Dad trusted Christ. as his Savior, but we couldn't be sure. A few more days went by. The doctor said, "Ma'am, it's hopeless. Would you turn off the machines?" And as we turned off the machines and waited for Dad to die, he didn't die. Actually would live for another 2 years. This man would go home and live by himself, drive himself to church 3 times a week, read through his Bible many times, and always thanked his daughter for ignoring his wishes and making sure he knew Jesus before he died. My friend, you can look at the Terri Schiavo case and you can say, wow, that's really sad, and is there anything that we can do? I remind you that in this country at one point, slavery was legal and the courts said it was okay. There was a point in this country women were denied the opportunity to vote or to participate in our government. There was a moment not too long ago, about 50 years ago, where depending on the color of the skin you were born with, your civil rights were different. And many courts said that was just fine. But you know what history's taught us, that ultimately justice did prevail. Slavery was abolished. Women now can vote and freely participate in our government. And you know your civil rights don't depend on your skin color. Now, the year 2005, the Terri Schiavo case ends sadly. And courts have said it was okay for this innocent, disabled woman to have her food and water taken away and to slowly die over 13 days. I hope and pray that if enough good people get good information, as a society, as a culture, we could make good decisions. I pray you learn the lessons I learned. Would you defend life as a gift from God? Would you have the heart of God for the least of these? Would you make all your decisions in light of eternity? My prayer, my friend, is if we learn these lessons, that indeed Terri Schiavo's death does not have to be in vain, and that future generations of senior citizens, disabled people, or others will have their life, their rights protected, and once again America will be a nation that defends life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every citizen.